Hello, Glastonbury. Do you ever feel unloved? Well, that's how I feel today. Anyway, let's continue with our story here. The first thing she did was to look at the clock to see exactly how much time she had at her disposal. He'll be away just as long as I said, she thought. Poor old Sam, what a shame to send him off. Then she retreated into her kitchen and hurriedly filled her kettle with fresh water for their tea, transferring what water there was already in the kettle into an enameled saucepan from the boiling of their eggs. She glanced then at the fire in her sitting room to make sure that her lover had not spoiled the growing redness of it by his absent-minded putting on of more wood. I'll make the toast the last thing, she thought. Oh, I'm hungry. I shouldn't have read this before I ate. And returning again into her kitchen, she cut up half a loaf into neat slices of bread. She then set to work with rapid, deft fingers to lay the table. This proceeding, swift though it was, gave her a deep satisfaction as Sam's father was wont to derive from his preparations for the sacrament. She did not precisely think, as she put a teaspoon in each of their 2 saucers and an egg spoon by each of their 2 egg cups, how over all this darkening quarter of the planet, female forms of the same love-demented race were doing just the same thing at the same moment. But she was fully aware of a delicious atmosphere of romantic sensuality in what she did. Their more dangerous passion hovered like an invisible incense round the sugar bowl, the slop basin, the milk jug, and round all these little silver spoons, some with the great Zoyland falcon and some with her own spear crest upon them. She proceeded then to set light in her parlor to candles, bringing a veritable illumination of them from every other part of the house to throw luster upon her love feast. The expression on her face when all this had been done, and when she had finally placed 2 chairs opposite each other, on either side of the little card table covered with a white cloth, was of the kind that only one of the great early masters could have done justice to. Its dominant note was an earthy, irrational, almost stupid complacency. A complacency that doubtless derived in a long, atavistic retrogression from aeons of passive, brooding female contemplation of the imperishable elements of continuity in the turbid torrent of life. And if you know what he just said then, you win an award. Leaning for a while against the back of the chair she intended for Sam, she allowed herself to fall into the waking trance of a very young girl. Zoyland had destroyed her physical virginity, but he had not touched, no, not so much as ruffled, that virginal dream state in a young girl's consciousness, wherein she awaits her first lover, and the bloom of what she keeps, like a handful of soft white swan's down or dandelion seed, to lull the sleep of Eros when he really does at last come to her and pitch his tent. The clock on her mantelpiece now struck the half hour from when she had sent Sam away, and she had other things to do. Leaving the table, she stared long and long, at the sofa where they had been sitting together. This sofa had no back. It was, in fact, a large-sized single-bed couch, standing against the wall of the room. With shining eyes, she ran upstairs and came down with a great armful of fresh bedclothes snatched from her linen chest. These she stretched out carefully upon the couch, tucking them in between and the wall. With a gleam in the eyes and the quiver of the lips of her one mischievous young girl making sport of another, she brought down after a second run upstairs, a single pillow and a single pillowcase. When all was ready and she had made the bed, she cast the same stupidly happy stare upon this achievement. The next thing she did was to give an anxious glance at the clock, and then run upstairs for a final act of preparation. It was almost dark outside the window now, and she had carried downstairs every available candlestick. But her personal preparations were of such classic simplicity that they could be done perfectly well in this gray, perishing light. She kept both the door at the top of her stairs and the door at the bottom wide open, so that up there in her bedroom the dying light of the natural day and the ritualistic light of her fête d'amour mingled together with the peculiar and mysterious charm which candlelight and daylight assume when they are associated with each other at either of the two twilights. Once more, she ran downstairs and, filling a small hot water can from her enameled saucepan, which had by this time begun. You've only just begun to steam a little. She hurried back to her twilight chamber, poured out the water into its basin, and stripping herself with eager fingers and every shred of clothing, set to work to sponge her bare, soft skin from head to foot. Let's get into it now. She felt, as she did this, as if her flesh and blood were something entirely apart from the deep consciousness wherewith she loved her lover. It was as if her body, after the tea table and the bed, were as soft of final and triumphant offering, the last and the dearest thing she could give to him, so that he might take his full pleasure on that sacred night. Violently she rubbed herself after this, all over, with her bath towel, till her limbs glowed warm and sweet, and then pulling on stockings, slippers, and a night-dress she had never worn before, she threw over herself a long, warm, dark blue dressing gown. Snatching up her brush and comb, she now descended to her illuminated sitting room, where, by the old-fashioned mirror, she combed out her hair, and then fastened it back much more carefully than she had ever done in her life before. She removed carefully the strands of her hair adhering to the comb, and as she threw them into the fire, she remembered what an old nurse of her mother's had once told her. Not her childish nurse, but a very old woman who used to stay with the Spears when she was a little girl, that if a girl's hair must make a sound as it burns, a sound that the girl herself can hear, she will lose her maidenhood within the year. Mine's gone already, she thought, but not really. She was ready for him now, and behold! As she looked at the clock, the hour she had given him was all but 5 minutes used up. She looked anxiously at her bright array of burning candles. Then she looked at herself in her blue dressing gown in the mirror. For a passing second she got a real thrill of pleasure from the shining eyes and bright cheeks which she saw reflected. But a sudden memory of one evening when she had been waiting for Zoyland swept over her, and she turned hastily away. Meanwhile, Sam had been walking slowly through the twilight in the same direction as they had when he had come. He was conscious of a vague feeling of fertility in the damp spring air, and of the hidden stirrings of vegetable juices and roots and stalks as his feet sank in the soft turf of the river bank, where thick swaths of last year's grass, lying along the ground and trodden by the feet of cattle, were interspersed with patches of young spring shoots, and with the immature foliage of yarrow and bedstraw. He felt, as he walked along, that life was at once far more exciting and far more dangerous than he had ever suspected. The freedom of conscience with which he had twice kissed Nell, even now, this afternoon, giving full rein to his feelings, was not threatened by any moral scruple. His heavy, sluggish nature, once roused to the magic of sex, had so little that was vicious. In the sense of being isolated and detached from tenderness and pity, that it brought with it no sense of guilt. It justified itself, and he felt pure and simple exultation from it. The strange thing was, and as the twilight darkened about him, this was what he found hard to understand in himself, that the renunciation of all possessiveness, which was his new ideal, did not debar him from snatching at this chance-given moment of love. The real reason was that Sam's devotion to Nell, as his unique true love, was so unqualified and heart-whole that his feeling at this heaven-sent moment did not carry with it that sense of talking which he had set himself to renounce. To love Nell, now that he felt she really loved him, seemed to him quite as much a giving as a taking. What did little trouble him, as he burst through the river mists and dug his heels and his sticks into the magnetic springtime soil, was the quivering exultation of his own mood. Life seemed to him just then almost too exciting, almost too charged with electric dangers and raptures. Sam was no coward, but he was essentially a slow-moving, slow-witted, timid animal. The ever tenor of his ways, until Nell appeared, had been so unruffled as so solidly earthy that he felt scared at this new riot in his nerves, as his new quicksilver were running like an unknown perilous stuff through every vein. As he strode blindly on in the grey dampness, he actually dared to articulate the word saint that was carried in the remotest portion of his consciousness. I will be a lover and a saint, his heart cried. He never afterward forgot that hour's walk by the side of White Lake Stream. Carried along upon the crested wave of his delicious adventure, what Sam remembered and resembled most nearly was a boy who was run away to sea, and who suddenly finds himself in the midst of an overwhelming predicament. A predicament which he realizes at the same time all his desire to be heroic and all his craving for romance. Boy, this part is boring, huh? Jesus. At the bottom of his nature, Sam had no small modicum of phlegmatic common sense. And in this very whirl and splash of the adventure to which he was responding, oh boy, he retained a certain background of bewildered surprise that it should be himself, the timid, plodding, enterprising self he knew so well, that had been given such a disturbing privilege. Compared with what Nell was feeling at this moment of time, Sam's emotions were pathetically youthful. The Don Quixote in him had been stirred, but what was really the only thing in him upon which the girl could lean? For the rest, he was in a mood in such turbulent bewilderment that the occasion with all it brought was only half real to him. In most love affairs between men and women, the element of reality is uniquely distributed. But in this case it was especially so. For whereas every aspect of what was happening was visibly clear to Nell, Sam was all wrapped up in a vague mist. Not exactly in an idealistic mist, however, for the sly Quantock fox in him kept up all the time a sniffing scrutiny of what was really going on. Nell's whole being, on the contrary, was melted into realism on this momentous night. Yeah, I know, we already went over this. Why is he fucking talking about this again? Sorry, I'm getting... It's so wordy, you know? Everything was twice as real as her, as usually was the case. And things were usually real enough. While Sam kept thinking to himself, what a puzzling confusion life is. Here am I, longing to be a saint, and yet with a chance of spending the night with the sweetest girl in Summershire. Nell thought simply and solely, I want to give everything I've got to Sam. He has come to me at last. He's come to me at last. Well, I'm going to keep on reading the next page, even though I don't want to, because I want to plow through this fucker. I think I'm just hungry. I'm getting hangry here. Sorry. When Sam paused at last, closed by White Lake Bridge, he lit a match to look at his watch. He saw that he had already allowed 40 minutes to pass since he had left the house. This vexed him, for he could hardly traverse in 20 minutes fields that had taken him 40 minutes to cross. His chin began to work as he put his watch away, and he cursed himself for his absent-minded blundering. The moment he swung around, however, he noticed a faint, dim, filmy light in the western sky. He knew at once what that sign hung in the heavens was: the young moon. The mist from the river and the still more insidious vapors wafted across Queen Sedgemoor so obscured this fragmentary luminary that it was no bright object that he stared at. He was standing almost due west of White Lake Cottage now, so that this dim white blur in the darkness hung directly over the dwelling of his love. To his excited feelings at that moment, that phantasmal object seemed much more than a natural phenomenon. I'm going to read this whole other page, just plow right through. That's what you got to do in life, right? Sometimes just plow right through. Eagerly he grasped with one of his hands a tuft of willow sprigs growing out of the head of an old bowed pollard, whose roots were in the wet earth at his feet, and leaning forward raised his stick exultantly in the air. The dark earth beneath him seemed to him then like a vast wild man horse, upon whose broad back he was being borne through space. A poignant smell of musk rose up from where his heavy boots pressed against that huge living creature. Young plants of common water, mint, must have been growing there to cause this scent. But an aromatic sweetness added yet another element to his enchantment. From this fragment of white mystery, there is slid across land and water into the soul of Sam Decker a thin, long, rippling, confederate stream of sweet disturbance. Where drowned crow would have subtly reasoned upon the mystical significance of this frail vessel of furious fancies, Sam just gave himself up to its palpable power. He became a wave in the Bristol Channel, a brecht in front of the Quandock Hills, a crystal in the Mendip stone wall, a black-strip perch in the Bruce under Pumperless Bridge. Brew. Sam and the old bent pollard, whose youthful sprouts he was clutching with such blind intensity, gave themselves up together so completely to the power of that obscured moon that an identical magnetism poured through the man's flesh and blood and shivered through the vegetable fibers of the tree. Yes, Sam felt as if he was a reckless rider, awkward and stiff, in his new release, but mounted on the dark equine back and behind the streaming mane of the revolving earth, and carried wildly through the wet mists toward his desire. He little knew what a superhuman naturalists were watching him then, as interested in his present antics, and not less sympathetic, as he himself had so often been over the aquarium in his father's museum. That shapeless white blur that still delayed to sink below the reedy horizon in the Sedgemoor vapors was to these watchers like the candle when Sam would hold something above some favorable Finn pet. In a universe so thrilling and of so aching with teeming consciousness, the man and the bowed pollard tree strained and inured together towards that misty image in the west. Cold against his clenched fingers were those smooth twigs. Cold against his mouth was the river breathing. Wild and yet faint in his ears were the gurgling sobs of the water as it rippled in the darkness around hidden roots and around the hollow stalks of last year's reeds. Well, I found that part very boring, but maybe your mileage is different. I don't know. I don't know why I found that particularly boring. It's very similar to everything that's come before. I think I'm just hungry, so I don't have the patience for Powys' bullshit tonight. He's kind of repeating himself now. We already know that those two people like each other. We already heard crap about the moon before. I mean, how many 100 pages is he just going to be talking about the moon, you know? Anyway, it is what it is. And I'll see you next time in Glastonbury. Cheers.